The clerk at the Vital Records office looked up from her computer screen with an expression I couldn't quite read. Confusion, maybe, or concern. She glanced at me, then back at the screen, then at me again. I'm not sure how to say this, but according to the state registry, you're deceased. The words didn't make sense at first. I stood there holding my driver's license, my passport, my birth certificate, all the documents I'd brought to update my address after my recent move. All the proof that I was very much alive. That's obviously a mistake, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm standing right here. I can see that. She turned the monitor toward me. But look. There it was. My full name, Ophelia Catherine Rain. My correct date of birth, March 15th, 1989. And next to it, in official government database formatting, status, deceased. Date of death, October 8th, 2024. My hands went cold. October 8th was 2 weeks ago. I'd been on a business trip to Chicago, attending a compliance conference. Very much alive. Working. Breathing. Existing. This has to be an error, I repeated, but my stomach had already dropped. Because I worked in compliance operations. I understood government systems and official records. And I knew that mistakes like this, declarative status changes in vital registries, didn't just happen randomly. Someone had filed this. Deliberately. I left the records office in a daze and went straight to the bank. My debit card had been declined that morning when I'd stopped for coffee. I'd assumed it was a technical glitch. But now, standing at the ATM trying to check my balance, the screen showed a message I'd never seen before. Account access restricted. Please contact customer service. Inside the bank, the representative took my information and typed for what felt like forever. Her expression shifted from professional courtesy to visible concern. Ms. Rain, your accounts have been flagged for unusual activity. I'm going to need to speak with a manager. What kind of unusual activity? I can't discuss the details, but there are some recent transactions that triggered our fraud protection systems. And... She paused, looking uncomfortable. Your account status shows as belonging to a deceased individual. There it was again. Deceased. I need to speak to someone about my trust account, I said, trying to keep my voice level. The one managed through your wealth services division. She made a call. Within minutes, a manager appeared, his expression grave. Ms. Rain, I think we should speak in private. In his office, he explained that my trust account, the one my grandmother had established for me 20 years ago, had been accessed 3 days prior. A substantial withdrawal had been initiated by my parents, listed as secondary beneficiaries in case of my death. My death, which had been officially recorded on October 8th. Someone moved fast, I said quietly. The bank manager pulled up the transaction history. The withdrawal request had been filed on October 11th, 3 days after my supposed death. The amount was $340,000, nearly the entire balance of the trust my grandmother had left specifically for me. The request is still processing, he explained. It takes 7 business days for transfers of this size to complete, especially when they involve trust accounts and beneficiary changes. We are currently on day 5. 2 more days. In 2 more days, the money would be gone. This is fraud, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I'm not dead. This is identity fraud and financial theft. I understand, and I believe you, but Ms. Rain, we need official documentation. The death certificate on file appears legitimate. It has all the required signatures, including a physician's certification and a registrar's stamp. Until that's corrected in the state registry, our hands are tied on reversing the beneficiary access. I stared at him. My parents filed a false death certificate to steal my inheritance. He shifted uncomfortably. I can't make accusations, but I can tell you that this situation needs to be resolved at the registry level first. Once your legal status is corrected, We can freeze the transaction and investigate the circumstances. How do I correct it? You appear in person at the Vital Records office with multiple forms of identification and request a correction. They'll need to verify that you're alive, which... He gestured at me sitting across from him. Shouldn't be difficult. I was just there. The clerk seemed uncertain about the process. Ask for a supervisor. This isn't common, but it's not unprecedented. Someone files incorrect information, and it needs to be corrected. The key word is deliberate. This wasn't an error, it was filed deliberately. I walked out of the bank and sat in my car for a long time, staring at nothing. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. My parents declared me legally dead to access my trust. The registry correction froze everything. That was the reality I was facing. Not a mistake. Not a bureaucratic error. A calculated scheme to steal money that had never been theirs, using a system that trusted paperwork more than it questioned intent. And they'd almost succeeded. If I hadn't tried to update my address at the records office, if I hadn't noticed my card declining, if I hadn't acted quickly, in 2 more days, the money would have been transferred. By the time I discovered it, they'd have had time to move it again, hide it, make it disappear. But they'd made one critical miscalculation. They'd assumed I wouldn't check. That I wouldn't notice. That I'd continue living my busy, independent life while they quietly erased me on paper and took what wasn't theirs. They'd forgotten something important about me. Something they should have remembered from all the years they'd tried to control my choices, my career, my life. I was meticulous. I noticed details. And I understood exactly how systems worked, including the system they just tried to manipulate. My name is Ophelia Rain. I'm 35 years old, and I work as a compliance operations specialist for a regional financial services firm. My job involves reviewing transactions, identifying irregularities, ensuring that processes follow regulations, and catching fraud before it causes damage. I read systems for a living. I understand paper trails, authorization chains, and exactly how official documentation flows through bureaucratic processes. I know what normal looks like, and I know what deliberate manipulation looks like. And this was deliberate. I'd built my career on attention to detail, on understanding the rules that govern financial systems, on seeing patterns that others miss. My parents knew this about me. They'd complained about it for years, how I questioned things, how I wanted documentation for family agreements, how I insisted on clarity rather than accepting vague promises. "You're so suspicious," my mother used to say. "So untrusting. Why can't you just accept that family takes care of family?" Because I'd learned early that family takes care of family in my household meant, we control what's yours and expect gratitude for the privilege. The trust had been the one thing they couldn't control. My grandmother had established it specifically for me when I was 15, after watching my parents manage, or mismanage, everything else in my life. She'd made it ironclad. The trust was mine alone, with no parental access, no co-signers, no exceptions. "This is yours, Ophelia," she told me. "No one else's. Your parents can't touch it, can't borrow from it, can't make decisions about it. When you turn 25, it's entirely under your control." She'd known. Somehow, she'd known I'd need that protection. The trust had been established with $280,000, a combination of my grandmother's savings and a life insurance policy she'd specifically designated for me. Over the past 20 years, through careful investment management by the bank's trust division, it had grown to $340,000. My parents had always been interested in it. Too interested. "That's a lot of money just sitting there," my father would say. "You could use it to help the family. Your brother's struggling with his business. We are facing some financial challenges. That money could make a real difference." "It's my trust," I'd reply. "Grandmother left it specifically for me." "And you're being selfish keeping it all for yourself when your family needs help." But it was never really about helping. It was about control. About the fact that there was one aspect of my life they couldn't manage, couldn't access, couldn't use as leverage to keep me compliant with their expectations. My younger brother, Wesley, had never questioned them. He'd followed the path they'd laid out: state college, sensible major, job in my father's business, marriage to a woman they approved of. He got praise, support, and constant validation. I'd questioned everything. I'd gone to a different college, chosen a career they didn't understand, moved to another city, built a life independent of their input and approval. And for that, I'd been labeled difficult, ungrateful, selfish. The trust was proof I didn't need them, that I had resources they couldn't control, and they'd never forgiven me for that independence, until they found a way to take it. Growing up, I'd learned to recognize the pattern. My parents didn't argue. They managed. They controlled through quiet pressure, through implications, through making you feel like your choices were always just slightly wrong. We are not saying you can't go to that college, Ophelia. We are just saying it's very far away. And expensive. Are you sure that's the right choice? You can date whoever you want, of course. But we are concerned about his background, his family situation. We just want what's best for you. That job sounds interesting, but wouldn't you prefer something more stable? Something closer to home? We miss you. Every decision was presented as mine to make, but with enough doubt attached that accepting their alternative seemed easier than fighting. Wesley never fought. He accepted their guidance and received constant affirmation in return. I fought. And I paid for it with years of subtle disapproval and not-so-subtle reminders that I was the difficult child. The trust had been my escape route. Knowing I had financial security independent of them meant I could make choices without fear. I could take the job in another city. I could build my career on my terms. I could maintain polite distance without being forced back into dependence. You never need us anymore, my mother would say with hurt in her voice. You've got your trust fund, your fancy job, your separate life. Family doesn't matter to you. Family matters. But my independence matters too. Independence. She'd say it like it was a disease. Your grandmother put ideas in your head about not needing anyone. Look where that's gotten you. Alone. I wasn't alone. I had friends, colleagues, a fulfilling career. But in their narrative, any life that didn't center them was a lonely one. Wesley had always been the favorite. Not in ways they'd admit openly, but in the thousand small ways that accumulate over time. His choices were celebrated. Mine were questioned. His struggles were understandable challenges. Mine were character flaws. When Wesley's business, a consulting firm my father had funded, struggled in its first year, it was just part of entrepreneurship. When I'd asked to borrow money for graduate school, it was maybe you're not ready for that level of commitment. I'd paid for my own education, built my own career, made my own choices, and it had driven them crazy that they couldn't point to anything I'd done wrong. I wasn't a failure. I wasn't struggling. I was successful and independent and completely beyond their control. The trust represented all of that. Money they couldn't access, security they hadn't provided, freedom they couldn't restrict. You know, your grandmother never liked us, my father had said once. Setting up that trust was her way of undermining our parenting, making you think you didn't need family. She was giving me options. She was turning you against us. But grandmother hadn't turned me against them. She'd simply given me the ability to see them clearly, to recognize that love shouldn't come with conditions, that family shouldn't require control, that independence wasn't betrayal. The trust was supposed to be untouchable, protected, mine. Until I became a problem they decided to erase. After college, I'd moved 3 hours away for my first real job. My parents had been upset, but couldn't argue with a solid career opportunity. I'd visited regularly at first, maintaining polite family connections while building my separate life. The visits became less frequent as I advanced in my career. My work demanded travel, focus, long hours. I'd call on holidays, send gifts for birthdays, attend major family events. But I'd kept my distance, both physically and emotionally. "You've changed," my mother would say during phone calls. "You're not the girl you used to be." I'm an adult now. Adults have their own lives. Adults still make time for family. But making time had always meant making concessions. Coming home meant enduring questions about why I wasn't married, why I focused so much on work, why I'd chosen to live so far away. Every visit reinforced why I'd left. The trust had made that possible. Knowing I had financial security meant I didn't need their approval or support. I could weather their disappointment without having to choose between independence and survival. They'd stayed interested in one thing, though: the trust. How much it was worth. When I planned to use it. Whether I'd consider helping family with it. "We are not asking for the money," my father would clarify. "We are asking if you've thought about your responsibility to family." Wesley could really use some capital for his business expansion. It's still family money, in a way. It's my money. Grandmother left it to me specifically. And she'd be disappointed to see how selfish you've become with it. The death declaration had been filed on October 8th. I'd been in Chicago that week for a 3-day compliance conference. My phone had been on silent during sessions. I'd stayed at a hotel, eaten meals alone while reviewing notes, and flown home on October 11th. 3 days completely unreachable. Perfect timing. I pulled up my calendar and checked the dates carefully. The conference had been scheduled months in advance. I'd mentioned it to my parents during a brief phone call in September, casual conversation about work travel, nothing significant. They'd known I'd be away. They'd known I'd be focused on work, hard to reach, occupied with professional obligations. The death certificate had been filed by my father, according to the records office clerk. He'd submitted it with physician certification, though I suspected that certification was fraudulent, and all the required documentation. The state registrar had processed it without question, because everything appeared legitimate on paper. By the time I returned from Chicago, I was legally dead. The trust's secondary beneficiaries, my parents, had been notified. They'd filed to access the funds within 3 days. They'd moved fast, calculating the processing time perfectly. In 2 more days, the money would be transferred, and by the time I noticed anything wrong, it would be too late to stop it. Except I'd tried to update my address. And I'd found out. The timing had been convenient for them. But my discovery had been inconvenient. I didn't call them. That was instinct. The urge to confront, to demand explanations, to express betrayal and anger. But I'd learned in my compliance work that confrontation often gives the guilty party time to adjust their story, hide evidence, prepare defenses. Instead, I went back to the Vital Records office and requested copies of everything. The death certificate, the physician's certification, the witness statements. All the documentation that had been filed to declare me legally dead. The supervisor, a woman named Patricia who'd worked in Vital Records for 20 years, reviewed my situation with a mixture of professional concern and personal horror. "This is identity fraud," she said bluntly. "Someone filed false documentation to have you declared deceased. That's a criminal matter. Can you tell me who filed it?" She checked the records. The death certificate was filed by Harold Rain, listed as your father. The physician's certification is from a Dr. Bernard Kelso. The witnesses are your mother, Vivian Rain, and someone named Wesley Rain. My whole family. They'd all signed. All participated. "I need to correct this," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What's the process?" Patricia walked me through it. I'd need to appear in person with multiple forms of identification. Provide proof of life, which was absurd but necessary. Fill out a correction request. Submit to verification procedures including fingerprints, and potentially a brief interview. How long does it take? Once filed, the correction is processed immediately in the system. But here's what you need to know, she lowered her voice. When a death status is corrected, it triggers automatic alerts to any institutions that access the deceased status for official purposes. Banks, government agencies, anyone who made decisions based on that death record gets notified that the record was false. I understood immediately. Everything freezes. Everything freezes. Pending transactions halt. Accounts lock. Questions get asked. And if there was fraud involved, and there clearly was here, those questions come from official investigators. I gathered every piece of identification I owned. Driver's license, passport, birth certificate, social security card, employment records, utility bills showing my current address. Everything that proved Ophelia Rain was alive, functioning, and very much not deceased. The next morning, I returned to the Vital Records office with my documentation. Patricia handled the correction personally, walking me through each step with the efficiency of someone who understood the gravity of the situation. For the record, she said as she processed my paperwork, this is the most blatant case of fraudulent death filing I've encountered. Usually when this happens, it's mistaken identity or clerical error. This is different. Deliberate. Very. She took my fingerprints, verified them against my existing records, and had me sign multiple attestations confirming my identity and that I was alive on October 8th and every day since. The documentation was painfully thorough. But I appreciated the thoroughness. This wasn't just about correcting a record, it was about creating an irrefutable paper trail that would protect me from any future attempts at this kind of fraud. The correction will be filed within the hour, Patricia explained. Once it enters the system, the alerts go out automatically. Any institution that accessed your death record, banks, insurance companies, government agencies, will be notified that the death status was incorrect and is now corrected. What happens to the people who filed the false certificate? That's for law enforcement to determine. But I'm required to flag fraudulent filings for investigation. This case will be referred to the district attorney's office for review. She paused, her expression sympathetic. I'm sorry this happened. Especially with family. Thank you. But I'm not sure they deserve to be called that anymore. The registry correction was filed at 10:47 a.m. on October 23rd. By 11:15 a.m., I received an email from the bank's fraud department confirming that my account status had been updated and all pending transactions were under immediate review. By noon, my account access was restored. The trust transfer that had been processing, the $340,000 withdrawal my parents had initiated, was frozen mid-process. I sat in my apartment looking at the email notifications, watching the system do exactly what it was designed to do when false information was corrected. Automatically. Efficiently. Without emotion or bias. A single correction had triggered a cascade of responses. Every decision made based on my supposed death was now suspect. Every transaction initiated by the secondary beneficiaries was now frozen pending verification. Every document signed claiming I was deceased was now evidence of fraud. I hadn't needed to argue. Hadn't needed to explain or defend or prove anything beyond my existence. The system, once given accurate information, had done the rest. My phone rang. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I didn't answer. She called again. Then my father. Then Wesley. I ignored all of them. There was nothing they could say that would change what they'd done. No explanation that would make declaring me dead to steal my inheritance acceptable or forgivable. They'd made their choice. I'd made mine. The difference was, my choice was backed by documented fact and legal correction. Theirs was backed by fraud. I went to work the next day as if nothing had happened. My colleagues noticed nothing unusual. I attended meetings, reviewed compliance reports, analyzed transaction patterns for irregularities. Normal work. Normal day. Except I knew that across town, My parents were discovering that their plan had fallen apart. That the money they'd thought was nearly theirs had been frozen. That their access had been revoked. That questions were being asked by people with the authority to demand answers. My supervisor, a woman named Bethany who'd mentored me for 3 years, stopped by my desk mid-afternoon. "You seem focused today. More than usual." "Just working through some complex analysis," I replied, which wasn't entirely untrue. "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up. The regional director mentioned your last compliance audit was exemplary. Very thorough documentation." "I believe in thorough documentation." She smiled. "It shows. Hey, are you okay? You look a little tired." "Just had some personal matters to handle. All resolved now." "Good. Let me know if you need anything." After she left, I thought about that exchange. Thorough documentation. It was what I did professionally, and it had become what saved me personally. Because while my parents had been sloppy, rushing, assuming I wouldn't notice, counting on the system to not question their paperwork, I'd been methodical. Every piece of identification properly maintained. Every address updated correctly. Every document organized and accessible. When I needed to prove I was alive, I could do so immediately with irrefutable evidence. They'd gambled on chaos and speed. I'd relied on order and precision. And the system always favors precision. On October 24th, the bank's fraud department flagged the account for irregular access. This was separate from my correction. This was their internal systems detecting the pattern of activity and questioning it independently. A trust account with a 20-year history of conservative management and minimal withdrawals suddenly has a large transfer requested immediately after the account holder's death? That's a red flag. Multiple red flags. The fraud analyst assigned to review my account called me directly. "Ms. Rain, I'm calling regarding unusual activity on your trust account. We've noticed some concerning patterns and wanted to verify your authorization." "I didn't authorize any withdrawals," I confirmed. "The transfer request was filed by individuals who claim to be beneficiaries due to my death." "Except I'm not dead." "Yes, we are aware. The registry correction came through yesterday. But we are conducting our own investigation into how the death status was used to access your account. Can you tell me when you first learned about the withdrawal request?" I walked her through the timeline. The declined card. The records office discovery. The bank visit. The correction filing. "And you had no knowledge that a death certificate had been filed in your name?" "None whatsoever. I was alive and working throughout the entire period in question." "Understood. Ms. Rain, I want to assure you that the funds are secure. The transfer has been completely frozen and will not complete. We are also reviewing how the secondary beneficiaries gained access so quickly after the death filing. Our protocols require certain verification steps that may not have been followed." "What happens now?" "We complete our internal investigation. We've also reported this to our legal compliance department, who will likely refer it to law enforcement. Financial fraud involving false death claims is taken very seriously." After we hung up, I realized something important. They'd noticed before I spoke. The system itself had flagged the irregularity. My parents' scheme had been doomed even before I filed the correction. My parents finally reached out via text message late that afternoon. My mother's name appeared on my screen with a message that tried for concerned, but landed somewhere around panicked. "Ophelia, we need to talk. There's been a terrible misunderstanding with the bank and your trust account. Can you please call us? This is urgent." I read it twice, then set my phone down without responding. An hour later, my father texted, "The bank is saying you're alive and the death certificate was fraudulent. We are very confused. We received notification that you had passed away. Please contact us immediately." Wesley's message was simpler. "What's going on? Mom and Dad are freaking out about something with your trust. Call me." I didn't respond to any of them. There was nothing to say. They knew exactly what was going on. They'd orchestrated it. And now they were discovering that their orchestration had consequences. My phone continued buzzing throughout the evening. Calls, texts, voicemails. Each message escalating from concerned to confused to demanding. This is ridiculous. Ophelia. Answer your phone. We need to sort this out before there's legal trouble. Whatever you think happened, you're wrong. Let us explain. But I'd worked in compliance long enough to recognize what these messages really were, attempts to control the narrative, to get me to engage before they'd figured out their defense, to gauge what I knew and how much damage control they needed to do. I didn't answer. Silence was its own kind of power, and I was discovering I preferred it to any conversation we could possibly have. On October 25th, I appeared in person at the bank's main branch for formal identity verification. They needed to confirm, for their records and for any potential legal proceedings, that I was indeed alive and the account's primary owner. The verification process was thorough. They checked my identification against their original account records, took new photographs, verified my signature, compared my current address to the one on file. Everything matches, the bank representative confirmed. Ms. Rain, you are definitively who you claim to be, and you are definitively not deceased. I'm glad we've established that. He didn't smile at my attempt at humor. This was serious business, and he treated it accordingly. For our records, can you confirm that you did not authorize Harold Rain or Vivian Rain to access your trust account? I did not. They were listed as secondary beneficiaries only in case of my actual death, which has not occurred. And you had no knowledge of the death certificate filed in your name? None until I discovered it at the Vital Records office. He made detailed notes. Ms. Rain, based on our investigation and your statements, we are treating this as a case of identity fraud and attempted financial theft. The funds in your trust account are secure and under your sole control. We've also implemented additional security measures to prevent any future unauthorized access attempts. What kind of measures? Any requests related to your account now require in-person verification with biometric confirmation. No phone authorizations, no proxy access, no exceptions. Your parents' names have been removed entirely from any association with the account. I felt something release in my chest, tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Thank you. We are sorry this happened. No one should have to prove they're alive to protect their own assets. The registry correction rippled through every system that had accessed my death record. My health insurance received notification and restored my coverage. The Social Security Administration updated its records. My employer's HR department got an alert and quietly corrected their internal files. And the bank's trust division, having processed the correction and completed their investigation, updated my official status from deceased to active. The moment that update entered their system, every pending transaction related to my supposed death was automatically voided. The $340,000 transfer request, cancelled. The beneficiary access granted to my parents, revoked. The temporary account changes made to accommodate the inheritance process, reversed. Everything froze. Then everything reset to how it should have been all along, with me alive and in complete control of my own assets. My compliance training had taught me that financial systems have built-in protections for exactly this kind of situation. When false information is corrected, the system doesn't just update the error. It traces every decision made based on that false information and reverses those decisions. It's elegant, really, efficient. Remove the false premise, and everything built on that premise collapses automatically. My parents had built their entire scheme on a false premise. And now they were watching it collapse, transaction by transaction, access point by access point, until they were left with nothing but the growing realization that they'd committed serious fraud. On October 26th, the bank called to inform me that the transfer attempt had failed mid-process. The money had never left my trust account, but the attempted withdrawal had triggered additional safeguards. When a large transfer is initiated from a trust account following a death, we have a 7-day processing period specifically to catch errors or fraud, the representative explained. In this case, your death status was corrected on day 6. The transfer was automatically voided, and the funds remained in your account throughout. So they never actually got the money. They never touched it. They had authorization to initiate the withdrawal based on the death certificate, but the money itself never moved. It's been sitting in your trust account the entire time, untouched and secure. I felt relief flood through me. Not just because the money was safe, but because it meant their plan had failed completely. They hadn't gotten away with anything. They'd simply exposed themselves as people willing to commit fraud against their own daughter. What happens to the people who filed the false withdrawal request? That's outside my purview, but I can tell you that our legal compliance department has referred this case to law enforcement. When financial fraud involves false death claims and attempted theft from trust accounts, it's prosecuted seriously. The district attorney's office has been notified. Will I need to be involved? You may be asked to provide statements or testimony confirming the facts. But you're the victim here, Ms. Rain. The investigation focuses on the people who filed the fraudulent documentation. After we hung up, I sat with that information. They'd failed. Completely. Their scheme had crumbled before it could succeed, and now they faced consequences they probably hadn't considered when they'd filed that death certificate. The compliance inquiry opened automatically on October 27th. When a fraud attempt is detected in a trust account, especially one involving identity theft and false death claims, the bank is required by law to conduct a formal review. Not an internal review, but an external one involving regulatory authorities and law enforcement. I received official notification by mail. The letter was formal, professional, and surprisingly reassuring. It confirmed that the attempted fraud had been detected and prevented, that my assets were secure, and that a full investigation was underway to determine criminal liability. The letter also included a timeline of events, compiled by the bank's investigators. October 8th, death certificate filed with State Registry, listing Ophelia Rain as deceased. October 11th, bank notified of death status through automated registry check. Secondary beneficiaries, Harold and Vivian Rain, contacted per trust account protocols. October 12th, beneficiaries submit withdrawal request for $340,000. October 19th, automated fraud detection flags withdrawal for a regular pattern review. October 23rd, death status corrected in State Registry. Bank receives automatic notification. All transactions frozen. October 24th, internal investigation confirms fraud attempt. Case referred to legal compliance. October 26th, transfer officially voided. Account security enhanced. The timeline was damning. It showed my parents had moved quickly after my supposed death, within 3 days, to access money that wasn't theirs. It showed their urgency, their calculation, their assumption that they could move fast enough to make the theft irreversible. They'd been wrong. Because systems don't move on assumption. They move on verification. And when verification fails, everything stops. My parents submitted their explanation to the bank on October 28th. I received a copy as part of the official investigation file, since I was the affected party. Their statement was interesting in its contradictions. They claimed they'd received notification that I had passed away, that they'd been given official documentation confirming my death, and that they'd acted in good faith as secondary beneficiaries to access funds they believed were now legally theirs. But they couldn't explain who had filed the original death certificate. My father's signature was on it, but he claimed he didn't remember signing it. My mother and Wesley had both signed as witnesses, but they claimed they'd been told it was standard paperwork for handling my estate. The physician certification, supposedly from Dr. Bernard Kelso, was the weakest point in their defense. Investigation revealed that Dr. Kelso had retired 3 years ago and was now living in Arizona. He confirmed he'd never treated anyone named Ophelia Rain, and had certainly never certified a death certificate for someone he'd never met. The certification was forged. Completely fabricated. Someone had created false medical documentation to support the fraudulent death claim. And that someone had filed it using my father's name and my parents' address as the contact information. Their explanation contradicted the paperwork. The paperwork contradicted their claims of good faith. And the forged physician certification proved this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate fraud. The bank's legal team noted all these contradictions in their investigation summary, as did the district attorney's office, which had opened its own criminal investigation. On October 30th, my parents' attorney reached out to the bank requesting time to prepare a more detailed response. The attorney, someone they'd clearly hired in panic once they realized the seriousness of what they'd done, argued that this was a family misunderstanding that had been blown out of proportion. The bank's response was brief and professional. The facts are clear. A false death certificate was filed. An attempt was made to access funds based on that false certificate. The account holder is alive and did not authorize any access. This is not a misunderstanding. It's fraud. The attorney tried a different approach, contacting me directly via email. Ms. Rain, I represent Harold and Vivian Rain regarding the recent trust account situation. They would very much like to speak with you to resolve this matter privately, without involving legal authorities. I believe we can find a solution that works for everyone involved. I forwarded the email to the bank's legal department without responding. Private resolution meant they wanted me to drop the investigation, to let them escape consequences, to accept their theft attempt as a family squabble rather than the crime it actually was. But I'd worked in compliance too long to misunderstand what they'd done. This wasn't a family matter. It was financial fraud, identity theft, forgery, attempted theft, multiple felonies documented across multiple systems. Time didn't help lies. It just gave more opportunity for investigators to find all the places where the lies contradicted themselves. And my parents had lied extensively. The paper trail proved it. The final decision came on November 5th. The bank's investigation concluded that attempted fraud had occurred, all attempted transactions were permanently voided, and my trust account was fully restored to my sole control with enhanced security protocols. The final decision came on November 5th. The bank's investigation concluded that attempted fraud had occurred, all attempted transactions were permanently voided, and my trust account was fully restored to my sole control with enhanced security protocols. The district attorney's office reached a similar conclusion and filed formal charges: identity fraud, forgery of medical documents, and attempted financial theft. All felonies. All carrying significant potential sentences. My parents' attorney reached out one more time, this time with a plea agreement proposal. If I agreed not to pursue civil charges, if I submitted a statement supporting leniency, they would accept reduced criminal charges with probation instead of prison time. Your parents are elderly, the attorney wrote. They made a terrible mistake driven by financial stress. Putting them in prison serves no purpose. They're deeply sorry and want to make amends. I read the email twice. Then I saved it to my fraud investigation folder and didn't respond. The bank called to confirm my trust status. Ms. Rain, everything has been resolved in your favor. Your account is completely secure, with no restrictions on your access. We've also updated our protocols to prevent this type of fraud from occurring again. You have sole control of all assets. Thank you. There is one additional restriction we've implemented: on your parents. They are permanently barred from any financial relationship with this institution. They cannot open accounts, apply for services, or have any contact with any customer accounts. This is a protective measure for you and for our other customers. It was more than I'd expected. More decisive. More final. I appreciate that. We are sorry this happened. You deserved better. I agreed. But I didn't say it out loud. Over the next week, I methodically secured everything. I changed banks entirely, moving my trust to an institution where my parents had never had any connection. I updated all beneficiary designations, removing my parents and Wesley completely, and naming a trusted friend instead. I added every possible security measure: biometric verification, multiple authentication steps, in-person confirmation requirements for any major transactions. I made sure that nothing like this could ever happen again. My parents tried to contact me several times during this period. Phone calls I didn't answer. Emails I didn't read. A letter delivered to my apartment that I threw away unopened. They wanted to apologize, to explain, to make amends. Their attorney's messages made that clear. They were hoping for reconciliation, for forgiveness, for me to understand that they'd made a mistake driven by stress and poor judgment. But I understood perfectly. They'd declared me dead to steal money that was never theirs. They'd forged medical documents. They'd involved my brother in fraud. They'd calculated the timing perfectly to coincide with my work travel. They'd moved quickly, deliberately, with full knowledge of what they were doing. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. A series of choices, each one more calculated than the last. And now they wanted me to excuse those choices because we were family. But family doesn't erase you. Family doesn't steal from you. Family doesn't commit felonies against you and then ask for understanding. 3 months after the registry correction, my life had returned to normal. My trust account sat safely in a new bank with security protocols so stringent that even I sometimes found them excessive. My career continued progressing. I'd been promoted to senior compliance analyst, partly for my work on fraud detection systems. My parents had accepted a plea agreement, reduced charges, probation, restitution payments, and permanent restraining orders preventing them from contacting me or attempting to access any of my accounts. Wesley hadn't been charged. Apparently his involvement had been minimal enough to avoid prosecution, though his relationship with our parents would carry its own consequences. I didn't attend their sentencing hearing. I didn't need to. The system had done what systems do when given accurate information and clear evidence. It had applied consequences proportional to the offense. They'd tried to erase me. The registry correction had frozen everything. And in the end, they'd erased themselves from my life instead. I didn't hate them. Hate requires energy, emotional investment, a belief that the relationship still matters enough to feel strongly about. I didn't feel any of that. I felt free, clear, finished. One afternoon, I received a final email from their attorney. Your parents want you to know they're sorry. They understand if you can't forgive them, but they hope someday you'll be willing to have a conversation. I read it once, then deleted it without responding. Because here's what I'd learned. You don't argue with people who erase you. You don't debate or defend or try to make them understand. You don't waste energy on those who valued money more than your existence. You just outgrow them. You move forward. You build a life so secure, so well documented, so thoroughly protected that no one can touch it again. And you walk away knowing that the best revenge isn't confrontation, it's simply living well, legally alive, and completely beyond their reach. My parents had tried to declare me dead. Instead, I declared them irrelevant. And the registry correction that froze everything had given me something more valuable than money: absolute clarity about who deserved space in my life and who didn't. They didn't. And I was finally, completely okay with that.